She woke up to the sound of her alarm, a small, tired buzz that seemed louder than usual in the quiet of her tiny apartment. The sun was just beginning to peek through the thin curtains, painting the room in soft orange and gold. She rubbed her eyes and sighed, feeling the weight of the day already pressing down on her. Life had never been easy, and lately it seemed like the challenges just kept piling up. She worked long hours at 2 jobs, one in a small bakery and the other at a local convenience store. Even with all that work, money was always tight and bills always seemed to arrive too early. She knew she was lucky to have a roof over her head and food on her table, but the constant worry about money never left her. Today, however, was different. Today was not about work or bills or the endless struggle to make ends meet. Today was about something she had never dared to do before. She was going on a blind date, a real one. The kind where someone else chose who she would meet, and she would meet them in person for the very first time. Her stomach fluttered as she thought about it. She felt excitement mixed with a nervous knot of anxiety. She had never been on a blind date before, and the idea of meeting someone who didn't know her at all was both thrilling and terrifying. She got out of bed slowly, trying not to wake her cat, who was curled up in a ball at the foot of the bed. She glanced at her small wallet sitting on the kitchen counter. Inside were $5, crumpled and worn from constant use. $5. That was all she had to spend on this date. Normally, she wouldn't even consider going out without having at least a little extra to feel comfortable. But she had promised herself she would try something new, step out of her comfort zone. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that a date wasn't about money. It was about connection, about finding someone who could see her for who she really was. She dressed carefully, choosing her favorite blue dress. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean and neat, and she liked the way it made her feel. She brushed her hair, tied it back simply, and applied a little bit of makeup, just enough to make her feel presentable. She looked in the mirror and forced herself to smile, even though the nervousness had not left her. She reminded herself that this was a chance to just be herself, and maybe, just maybe, things could turn out better than she expected. Walking to the cafe was nerve-wracking. The streets were busy, filled with people rushing to work, running errands, or just going about their lives. She clutched her $5 tightly in her hand, feeling the weight of it in a way that made her chest tighten. It wasn't just money. It was her worry, her fear of not being enough, and her hope that maybe somehow she could have a moment of happiness today. Every step felt heavy, but she kept moving forward, reminding herself that she had made this choice and she wasn't going to back out now. The cafe was small but charming, with soft music playing in the background and the smell of coffee and pastries filling the air. She arrived early, her heart beating faster than she expected. She found a small table in the corner and sat down, placing her bag carefully on the chair next to her. She looked around nervously, taking in the scene. Couples chatted softly at other tables. A few people were reading books, and the barista moved quickly behind the counter, preparing drinks with practiced ease. She took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing thoughts. As she waited for her date, she couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and anxiety. What would he be like? Would he judge her when he saw how little she had to spend? Would he notice the way her hands shook slightly as she fidgeted with her purse? She tried to push those thoughts away, telling herself that it didn't matter. She was here, she was trying, and that was what counted. She took out her phone to distract herself, scrolling through messages and social media, but her mind kept wandering back to the date, to the unknown man who would soon sit across from her. Across the cafe, at a table by the window, another man sat alone. He was well-dressed in a suit that looked expensive but tasteful. His hair was neatly combed and his posture exuded confidence. He was a single dad, a CEO of a growing company, and he carried the weight of responsibilities that few could understand. Despite his busy life, he had taken the afternoon off to have lunch alone, to enjoy a rare quiet moment. He had been at the cafe before, but today something felt different. His attention was drawn to the young woman in the corner. She looked out of place in her simple dress, yet there was something about her that caught his eye. He watched quietly, noticing small details, the way she carefully counted her money before ordering, the gentle way she smiled when a barista handed her change, and the nervous glances she gave the door every few minutes. There was a sincerity about her, an authenticity that seemed rare in the world he usually navigated. He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to keep watching, curious about her story. Back at her table, she finally saw her date approaching. He waved nervously and she forced herself to stand, greeting him with a polite smile. He was kind-looking with an easy smile that put her slightly at ease. They shook hands and he gestured for her to sit. Conversation started awkwardly at first, small talk about the weather and the cafe. She tried to keep her nerves under control, laughing at his jokes when they were funny, asking questions to keep the conversation flowing. But her mind kept drifting to the $5 in her wallet. She had planned carefully, calculating how much she could afford for a small drink and a pastry. She knew she couldn't spend more than that without feeling anxious and embarrassed. She hoped her date wouldn't notice, hoped he wouldn't think she was cheap or unprepared. She reminded herself that it wasn't about money, it was about connection. But the worry gnawed at her anyway. Meanwhile, the CEO continued to watch from his table by the window. He saw the subtle struggle, the way she hesitated when ordering, how she counted her money over and over, how her fingers tapped nervously on the table. He felt a mixture of concern and admiration. Concern, because he could see how hard life had been for her, and admiration because she carried herself with dignity despite the difficulties. He found himself wanting to know her story, to understand what had brought her here, to see her smile without worry. The blind date progressed, slowly but surely. The girl found moments to laugh, moments where her nervousness faded, replaced by genuine curiosity and interest. She discovered that her date was kind and thoughtful, asking questions and listening to her answers. She shared small pieces of her life, her jobs, her struggles, her hopes for the future, carefully choosing words that wouldn't reveal how tight her finances really were. Yet in her honesty, there was a spark of life, a warmth that seemed to radiate from her. As the minutes passed, she felt a sense of relief mixed with surprise. The date wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it meaningful. She glanced around the cafe and her eyes met the gaze of the man at the window. He smiled subtly, and she felt a strange sense of comfort, as if someone understood her without her saying a word. She looked back at her date, taking a deep breath and deciding to focus on the present moment rather than the money she worried about. Then, a small incident happened. As she reached for her drink, she accidentally knocked it slightly, spilling a little on the table. Her face flushed with embarrassment, and she quickly grabbed napkins to clean it up. The CEO at the window noticed immediately. He didn't intervene directly, but he watched with a quiet kindness, as if silently encouraging her. It was a small moment, but it mattered. He saw her humanity, her imperfections, and he didn't judge. The girl felt a mix of emotions. Embarrassment, yes, but also a strange sense of reassurance. Someone was noticing her, but not in the way that made her feel small or unworthy. She realized that even in a world that often judged people by their appearance, their money, or their status, there were moments of genuine connection and understanding. She smiled faintly, trying to calm her racing heart. Her date continued, unaware of the quiet observer across the cafe. They talked about hopes, dreams, favorite books, and movies. She laughed at small jokes, shared stories from her past, and listened to his experiences with interest. She felt, for the first time in a long while, that she could just be herself without pretension or fear. The CEO watched, intrigued by her resilience. He saw the courage it took for her to come here alone, to face a new experience with limited resources, and to put herself out there despite the risks. He felt a growing admiration for her, not for what she had, but for who she was. There was a quiet dignity in her actions, a strength that was hard to ignore. As the conversation at her table continued, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The $5 in her wallet still weighed on her mind, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. She realized that today was not about the money. It was about trying, about showing up, about taking a chance on life and connection. She felt a sense of pride in herself, in her ability to face the unknown with courage. By the time the first part of the date ended, she felt exhausted but happy. The conversation had been real, and the moments of laughter and shared stories had left her feeling lighter than she had in months. She looked around the cafe once more, and her eyes met the CEO's again. This time their brief smiles felt like an unspoken understanding. He nodded slightly, as if acknowledging her courage and effort, and she felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, she took a deep breath. The day had been full of nervousness, hope, embarrassment, and small joys. It had not been perfect, but it had been real. And in that reality, she found a small spark of something she hadn't expected. Possibility. Somewhere across the room, the CEO watched her leave, quietly thinking that sometimes the most remarkable people were the ones who carried the world quietly on their shoulders and still found a way to smile. The girl walked slowly down the quiet streets after leaving the cafe. Her heart was still pounding from the nerves of the blind date, but there was also a small glowing feeling of relief. She had survived it. More than that, she had enjoyed parts of it which surprised her. For a long time, her life had been a series of small, difficult steps, each one heavy with worry and exhaustion. But today she had felt something different, a lightness she hadn't felt in months. She clutched her purse close, feeling the weight of her $5 inside. But the money seemed less important now. She thought about the man she had just met, his easy smile and the way he listened when she spoke. He hadn't seemed judgmental at all. He had asked questions, yes, but they had been kind questions. Questions that made her feel like her thoughts mattered. She had been surprised by how comfortable it felt to talk to him, even though they barely knew each other. In the past, she had often felt invisible, like no one truly noticed the effort it took for her to keep moving forward. But today, for a little while, someone had noticed. Meanwhile, across the cafe, the CEO sat quietly, finishing his own lunch. He had watched the entire interaction from a distance, observing the girl with an interest he could hardly explain. There was something about her presence that drew him in. It wasn't her beauty, though she was attractive in a soft, natural way. It wasn't her manner of speaking, though she had spoken with intelligence and thoughtfulness. It was the way she carried herself, the small details that revealed her life's struggles without her having to say a word. The way she hesitated before ordering, the careful way she counted her money, the polite smile she offered to the barista. These were small things, but to him, they painted a picture of someone remarkable. He found himself thinking about her long after she had left the cafe. It was unusual for him to notice strangers so deeply. His life was filled with schedules, meetings, and responsibilities. He rarely had time to think about the lives of people he didn't know, yet her small acts of dignity and resilience lingered in his mind. He wondered about her story, about what challenges she faced, and about the little victories she must have celebrated quietly every day. Something told him that this was the kind of person worth knowing. The girl walked the few blocks to the bus stop, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She was tired, her legs aching from long hours at work and from the nerves she had carried throughout the date. But there was also a sense of pride. She had faced a fear, stepped out of her routine, and done something new. That mattered to her. She looked at her small wallet once more and allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't much, but it had been enough to get her through today. She had survived, and she had even managed to find joy in the process. At home, she sank into her chair and reflected on the date. She remembered the moments of laughter, the small conversation, and the fleeting feeling that maybe, just maybe, someone had seen her for who she truly was. The thought was both comforting and frightening. She had been hurt before, and the fear of disappointment lingered at the edges of her mind. But tonight she decided to allow herself a moment of hope. She closed her eyes and imagined a life where small gestures of kindness and understanding could exist, where people could connect without judgment or expectation. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of her alarm again, but this time there was a sense of anticipation rather than dread. She moved through her routine with careful steps, her mind replaying the previous day's events. She thought about the man at the cafe, the way he had seemed to notice her without intruding, the quiet respect in his gaze. She wondered if she would ever see him again, if the world could offer her a chance to connect with someone who understood the quiet struggles of her life. She made her way to work, her steps a little lighter than usual. At the bakery, she greeted her coworkers with a tired but genuine smile. They asked about her weekend and she replied briefly, careful not to reveal too much. Her life had taught her to protect herself, to keep her joys and fears private. Yet there was a small glow inside her, a feeling that maybe life could offer moments of kindness, even if they were rare. At the cafe, the CEO had returned to his usual routine, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. He remembered the way she had counted her money, the gentle way she had smiled despite her nerves, and the small incidents that revealed her humanity. He found himself curious about her, wanting to understand her story, to know the life she led outside of that small moment in the cafe. He realized that in all his years of managing companies, making decisions and dealing with responsibility. He rarely encountered someone who left such an impression simply by being themselves. A few days later, the girl found herself returning to the cafe, not because she expected to see her date again, but because she liked the quiet charm of the place. She found a small table near the window and ordered a simple coffee, careful not to spend more than a few dollars. As she waited, she allowed herself to relax, to enjoy the warmth of the cup in her hands and the soft background music. She thought about the recent date, about the small joys and anxieties that had accompanied it, and about the possibility that life could offer moments of connection even in the midst of struggle. She didn't notice at first that the CEO was there again, sitting a few tables away. He had come for a meeting with himself, a rare break from his busy schedule. But as soon as he saw her, he recognized her immediately. He watched quietly, noticing the small gestures, the way she adjusted her scarf, the way her fingers traced the edge of the table, the careful attention she gave to her coffee. There was something captivating about her, something beyond appearance or charm. She carried herself with quiet strength, and he found himself wanting to understand the life that had shaped her into the person she was. For the next few minutes, neither spoke or approached. The girl sipped her coffee, lost in thought while the CEO observed from a distance, considering whether it was appropriate to introduce himself. He had seen many people in his life, some of whom he had helped, others he had simply known in passing. But something about her drew him in, a combination of curiosity, admiration, and a quiet desire to connect. He realized that he wanted to offer more than a passing glance. He wanted to know her story, to see her smile without the weight of worry clouding it. The girl noticed him eventually, catching his gaze briefly. She felt a small flicker of recognition, and wondered if he was the same man from the cafe a few days ago. She hadn't expected to see him again, and the realization brought a mixture of surprise and nervousness. He smiled subtly, a quiet acknowledgement, and she returned the gesture, unsure why her heart seemed to skip a beat. There was a strange comfort in the recognition, a feeling that perhaps some connections were meant to linger, even when circumstances were difficult. As the morning passed, the girl's thoughts kept returning to her life and the choices she had made. She reflected on the challenges she faced, the jobs she juggled, and the constant worry about money. She realized that despite everything, she had managed to hold on to a sense of hope, a belief that small moments of kindness and understanding could still exist. The memory of her blind date and the quiet presence of the CEO observing her reminded her that the world was not entirely harsh, that there were people who noticed and cared, even in small, subtle ways. The CEO, meanwhile, decided to take a small step. He approached her table, careful to appear casual, and asked if he could join her for a moment. She looked up, slightly startled, but nodded politely. He introduced himself again, smiling warmly, and she responded with her own introduction, still a little unsure but willing to engage. Their conversation began cautiously, with small talk about the cafe and the weather, but gradually it grew more comfortable. He asked gentle questions, allowing her to share as much or as little as she wanted. She felt a mixture of surprise and relief. Here was someone who seemed genuinely interested in her, who didn't judge her for her modest choices or her nervousness. She spoke about her work, her small routines, and her quiet ambitions, careful to convey her true self without revealing the full extent of her struggles. Yet even in her careful words there was authenticity. He listened attentively, nodding, asking thoughtful questions, and responding with kindness. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. As they continued to talk, a small incident occurred. She reached for her coffee and accidentally knocked it slightly, spilling a few drops on the table. Her face flushed with embarrassment, and she quickly grabbed a napkin. The CEO smiled gently, reassuring her that it was fine, and helped her clean up without making a scene. The gesture was small, but it carried a weight of understanding and care that she hadn't expected. She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet gratitude for this stranger who had noticed her without judgment. They continued to talk, gradually sharing small stories about their lives, their hopes, and their experiences. She found herself laughing at his subtle humor, and he found himself admiring her resilience and gentle strength. Time seemed to pass quickly yet slowly, allowing them to connect in a way that felt natural and unforced. She realized that this moment, simple as it was, mattered more than she could have anticipated. It was a reminder that human connection, even brief and tentative, could offer comfort, understanding, and hope. By the time they parted ways, the girl felt lighter than she had in days. She had shared a piece of herself and had been met with kindness and respect. She walked home with a sense of quiet happiness, thinking about the unexpected moments that life sometimes offered. The CEO watched her leave, quietly impressed and moved by her presence. He realized that she had a strength that few possessed, a combination of courage, humility, and grace that left a lasting impression. For both of them, this brief encounter marked the beginning of something new. It was a small chapter in their lives filled with curiosity, cautious hope, and the recognition of each other's humanity. They had glimpsed the possibility that connection could exist beyond appearances, beyond social status, and beyond fear. It was a small but meaningful step, one that neither would forget. The following days felt heavier than usual for the girl. Life had its usual weight pressing down. Work shifts that seemed endless, bills that refused to wait, and the constant hum of worry about money and the future. Yet something had changed inside her. Even amid the struggle, a small spark of hope lingered. A quiet reminder of the encounter at the cafe and the brief, unspoken connection she had felt with the CEO. She couldn't explain why, but the memory of his gentle attention made her feel seen in a way that had been rare for years. It was a strange, warm feeling that she tucked carefully into her heart, carrying it with her even as she went about her daily life. At the bakery, she poured coffee and arranged pastries with her usual precision. Though her mind kept drifting, she remembered the way he had watched her. Not with judgment or curiosity, but with something quieter, something kinder. The image of his calm, observant presence kept replaying in her mind. She shook her head, trying to focus. Life couldn't pause for memories, and she had responsibilities, but the thought stayed. She began to realize that this was more than mere curiosity. It was a feeling she hadn't acknowledged in a long time. Later that day, she had her second job at the convenience store. It was long and tiring, stocking shelves, attending to customers, and handling the small emergencies that seemed to appear every hour. By the time she finally clocked out, the evening had fallen. The streets were quieter, filled with the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional laughter of neighbors returning home. She walked slowly, clutching her purse, still feeling the faint echo of nervous excitement from days before. Even though she had no idea what would come of it, the thought of seeing him again lingered like a small, bright light in her routine darkness. Meanwhile, the CEO's days continued with their usual intensity. Meetings, emails, decisions, and constant responsibilities filled his hours. Yet, he found his mind wandering back to her, the girl who had carried herself with quiet dignity despite the world's pressures. Her presence had left a subtle but lasting impression. He remembered the way she had smiled despite her nerves, the gentle attention to small details, and the way she had navigated her world with dignity despite limited means. He realized he wanted to know her, to understand her story, not as a casual curiosity, but as a sincere interest in the life of someone remarkable. Several days later, the girl found herself walking past the cafe again. It had become a strange ritual without her consciously realizing it. Part of her wanted to see him, to feel that quiet connection again, even if they didn't speak. Part of her worried that he might not even be there, or that the memory was only in her mind. She paused at the door, glanced inside, and felt a familiar flicker of hope. Sure enough, he was there, seated by the window, reading a newspaper, but occasionally looking up, almost as if he had been expecting her. Their eyes met briefly, and he offered a subtle, warm smile. She felt her chest tighten, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. He waved slightly, and she hesitated before returning the gesture. Finally, she stepped inside, choosing a small table nearby. She ordered a simple drink, careful with the few dollars she had, but this time she felt a little less anxious. There was a sense of quiet familiarity, a recognition that today might not be perfect, but it could be meaningful in its simplicity. She sat with her drink, feeling the warmth seep into her hands, and watched the soft activity of the cafe around her. The world outside seemed less pressing in these moments, allowing her to exist just for herself, even briefly. After a few minutes, he approached her table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked gently, not assuming, but leaving the choice entirely to her. She hesitated only briefly before nodding, a polite yet genuine gesture. He sat down across from her, his calm presence easing some of the nervous energy she had been carrying. There was a quiet understanding in his approach. He was here but not overwhelming, interested but not demanding. It was a rare kind of attentiveness that made her heart beat faster without causing fear or discomfort. They began to talk again, slowly, starting with small things: the weather, the cafe, mutual observations. But gradually the conversation deepened. She found herself sharing small details about her work, about the little victories and challenges she faced daily. She spoke of her 2 jobs, the exhaustion she often felt, and the tiny moments that brought her joy, like her cat waiting for her at home, or a freshly baked pastry in the morning. He listened intently, asking questions not to pry but to understand, nodding thoughtfully and responding with gentle observations. As she spoke, she felt a mixture of nervousness and relief. Talking about her struggles was not easy, especially with someone she barely knew. Yet here was a man who didn't seem to judge her for them. Instead, he showed curiosity, respect, and quiet admiration. She realized that her experiences, which often felt like burdens, were being received with understanding rather than pity. That alone was remarkable to her. At one point, she hesitated before revealing a small detail about her financial situation. She counted her words carefully, aware that he might view her differently if he knew the truth. Yet she decided to trust the moment. "I don't have much," she admitted softly. Sometimes even a small outing can feel like a lot. She looked down at her hands, unsure of his reaction. He smiled gently, a mix of understanding and reassurance. "I see," he said quietly, "and I think that makes you all the more remarkable. Life isn't easy, and yet you keep moving forward." His words were simple, but they carried a weight she hadn't expected. They weren't pity or judgment, they were acknowledgement. He saw her strength, and that recognition mattered more than any amount of money. Their conversation continued, and she began to relax more than she had in years. There was no pretense, no pressure to impress, no expectation of perfection. Just 2 people talking, sharing pieces of their lives, and slowly building a connection. She felt a strange comfort in his presence, as if the world's noise and chaos could fade away for a while, leaving only the quiet space between them. At one point, her hand brushed against her drink and she spilled a small amount on the table. She froze, her face heating with embarrassment. But before she could react further, he reached out calmly with a napkin. "It's okay," he said softly, helping her clean up. "No harm done." She felt a wave of gratitude and relief. It was such a small gesture, but it carried a reassurance that she hadn't realized she needed. He wasn't there to criticize or judge. He was there to support, quietly and respectfully. As the afternoon wore on, they shared more stories, her dreams of a better life, the challenges she faced, and the small moments of happiness that kept her going. He shared pieces of his own life as well, carefully choosing words that didn't overwhelm but allowed her to see the person behind the title. He spoke of his work, his responsibilities as a father, and the lessons he had learned along the way. There was honesty in his words, tempered with humility, and she found herself listening with genuine interest. She realized that they were forming a connection not based on appearances or wealth, but on understanding shared values and mutual respect. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen for who she was, not for what she had or lacked. The quiet attentiveness of his presence, combined with the absence of judgment, allowed her to feel safe enough to share even the vulnerable parts of herself. By the time the cafe started to empty, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The hours had passed quickly, but they had been full of meaningful moments of laughter, shared observations, and quiet understanding. She gathered her things, still feeling the small flicker of hope that had been growing in her heart. As she stood, he offered a reassuring smile, one that seemed to say without words that the moments they shared mattered. Outside, the streets were bathed in the soft glow of the evening sun. She walked slowly, her mind replaying the conversation, the gestures, and the sense of genuine connection. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a life where kindness, understanding, and shared moments of humanity could exist alongside the struggles she faced daily. The encounter had reminded her that even small gestures, quiet attentiveness, and sincere presence could make a difference in someone's life. The CEO watched her leave, quietly impressed and moved by the resilience and quiet strength she carried. He realized that she had managed, despite challenges and limited means, to remain genuine, kind, and full of hope. In a world that often valued appearances, wealth, and status, Her authenticity stood out as something extraordinary. He felt a growing sense of admiration and curiosity, a desire to see how her story would unfold, and whether he could be part of it in a meaningful way. That evening, both returned to their separate lives, carrying with them the memory of the afternoon. For her, it was a reminder that connection and understanding could exist even in unexpected places. For him, it was a reminder that remarkable people often went unnoticed, quietly living lives filled with strength and dignity. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between their worlds, a small thread of possibility began to form, linking their stories in ways neither could yet fully imagine. The days after their cafe encounter were filled with a quiet tension for the girl. Life was the same as ever. Long hours at 2 jobs, bills that seemed relentless, and the constant stress of simply making ends meet. But now, there was another layer. Her thoughts kept returning to the CEO, to the way he had listened, the quiet understanding in his eyes, and the subtle gestures that had made her feel seen. She didn't know if she would ever see him again, and that uncertainty made her restless. She found herself imagining what it would be like if their connection continued, if there were more conversations, more moments where someone could see her for who she truly was. Her friends noticed a difference in her. She smiled more easily, laughed a little more freely, and seemed to carry herself with a faint air of hope that had been absent for years. One of her co-workers, a young woman who had been friendly since they started working together, asked if she had met someone. She shrugged, a small secretive smile on her face. "Maybe," she said softly, not wanting to reveal too much. The thought of him, the CEO who had quietly observed her, remained a private treasure, a secret thread of possibility she wasn't ready to share. Meanwhile, the CEO found himself thinking about her more often than he expected. He tried to focus on work, to manage the endless responsibilities and decisions that filled his days. But his mind wandered to her small, honest gestures, the careful way she handled her money, the soft smile she offered despite nervousness, and the way she had shared pieces of her life with him so openly. He realized that he admired her strength and resilience. It wasn't her beauty, her charm, or her appearance that drew him in. It was the depth of character she carried quietly, without needing recognition. A week later, the girl found herself once again near the cafe. She hadn't planned to come, but something had drawn her there. She entered hesitantly, aware of the small flutter in her chest. The cafe was quieter than usual, the soft hum of conversation blending with the scent of coffee and pastries. She scanned the room and her eyes landed on him immediately. He was seated at the same table near the window, reading a newspaper. When he noticed her, he smiled gently, the warmth in his expression easing some of her anxiety. She walked over and sat at a table nearby, unsure if she should approach or wait for him to speak first. Before she could decide, he stood and came toward her. "Hello again," he said softly, as if greeting an old friend rather than a stranger. "Would you like to join me?" Her heart skipped a beat. She nodded, grateful and slightly nervous, and he guided her gently to the table. Sitting down, she felt the familiar comfort of his presence. There was a quiet reassurance in the way he sat, in the calm attention he offered, that made her feel as though she could breathe more freely than she had in months. Conversation began slowly, tentative at first, but soon deepened. She spoke about her days, the little triumphs and small disappointments, and the constant juggling act of work, bills, and personal life. He listened attentively, asking gentle questions, showing genuine interest without any hint of judgment. She found herself laughing at his subtle humor and sharing moments she hadn't shared with anyone else. The cafe seemed to shrink around them, creating a small world where only their voices, thoughts, and emotions mattered. At one point, her nerves got the better of her. She reached for her wallet to check how much she could spend on her drink, and realized she was short for the pastry she wanted. Panic rose in her chest, a familiar wave of anxiety. She considered asking to skip it or leaving without ordering, but the idea of disappointing him, or appearing clumsy and unprepared, made her hesitate. Her fingers fiddled nervously with the edge of the napkin, her mind racing. He noticed her hesitation immediately. "It's okay," he said quietly, a calm smile on his face. "Don't worry about it." He signaled subtly to the barista and discreetly covered the difference. She looked up, stunned, a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment flooding her face. I didn't expect that," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head gently. "No need to explain. It's just a small thing." The gesture was small but significant. It wasn't just about money. It was about understanding, about recognizing her struggle without making her feel small or judged. She felt a warmth spread through her, a quiet reassurance that perhaps for once someone could see her without expecting her to be more than she was. It was a lesson in kindness, humility, and empathy that she hadn't realized she needed. They continued their conversation, now with a subtle new closeness. She shared more about her past, about the times she had felt invisible or undervalued, and about the quiet moments of pride she had in herself for persevering. He listened with care, offering words of encouragement and understanding without ever making her feel that her life needed fixing. He asked questions that allowed her to reflect, to think about her goals and dreams, and to see her own strength more clearly. As the afternoon passed, they laughed at shared experiences and the small absurdities of life. She told him about funny mistakes at work, small coincidences, and the little victories that often went unnoticed. He shared stories from his own life as well, carefully choosing moments that revealed his human side without overwhelming her with status or authority. There was honesty in his words, tempered with humility, and she found herself trusting him more with each passing minute. Then came a moment that shifted the day entirely. A friend of hers who also worked at the bakery unexpectedly entered the cafe. She waved and came over to say hello, chatting briefly before noticing the man sitting with her. She paused, surprise flickering in her eyes, then smiled politely. "I didn't know you had company," she said softly. The girl felt a pang of worry. She hadn't planned for anyone to see them together, and the thought of being judged, misunderstood, or gossiped about made her cheeks warm. But the CEO's calm presence reassured her. He smiled at the friend, nodding in greeting, and she saw the respect in his demeanor. He wasn't there to impress or intimidate. He was simply himself, acknowledging the connection without pretense. The friend left shortly after, and the girl felt a wave of relief mixed with admiration. She realized that part of the comfort she felt with him came from the way he carried himself. Kind, patient, and genuine without any need for performance. As the cafe began to quiet, she noticed the evening light filtering through the windows, casting a soft glow over their table. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't a life free of struggle or worry, but it was a moment of genuine connection, a rare space where she could breathe without fear. She realized that the small gestures, the gentle smile, the quiet attentiveness, the act of covering her pastry, mattered more than she could have imagined. They weren't just acts of kindness. They were lessons in empathy and human connection. The CEO seemed to sense the moment as well. He leaned back slightly, giving her space while maintaining attention. There was no pressure, no expectation, only the quiet presence of someone who genuinely cared about her experience in that moment. He had seen the small struggles, the subtle fears, and the quiet strength she carried, and he acknowledged them without judgment. It was a rare form of respect, and it left a lasting impression on her. Eventually, the time came to part ways. She gathered her things slowly, not wanting the moment to end, yet knowing it must. He stood with her, offering a warm smile and a gentle nod. "I'll see you again soon," he said softly. She nodded, her heart fluttering with a mix of hope and nervous anticipation. There was no grand declaration, no overwhelming promises, just a quiet acknowledgement that their connection mattered and that it could continue. Walking home that evening, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Life remained challenging, with work and bills and constant responsibilities, but the day had reminded her that small moments of kindness and understanding could exist even amid struggle. The encounter had reaffirmed her belief that human connection, respect, and empathy mattered more than appearances, wealth, or status. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a life where such connections could become a part of her daily experience. The CEO returned to his own home, reflecting on the day. He thought about her strength, her resilience, and the quiet courage she carried despite her limited means. He realized that wealth and status were meaningless in comparison to the depth of character she possessed. She had shown him that true strength could exist quietly, without need for recognition, and that authenticity and kindness were far more valuable than outward appearances. He felt a growing admiration for her, not as a passing curiosity, but as a sincere appreciation for the person she was. That night, Both went to bed with a sense of quiet reflection. For her, it was the knowledge that she had shared a part of herself and had been met with understanding and respect. For him, it was the realization that remarkable people often lived, quietly, unnoticed, yet carried within them a strength that could leave a lasting impression. Somewhere between their worlds, a subtle bond was forming, delicate but real, built on shared humanity, respect, and the recognition of each other's value. In the days that followed, the girl felt a renewed sense of determination. Work remained demanding. Money remained tight and life continued to challenge her, but she moved through it with a faint smile and a sense of hope she hadn't carried before. The memory of the cafe, the gentle gestures, and the quiet understanding of the CEO stayed with her, a reminder that even in difficult circumstances, kindness, empathy, and connection could change the way she saw herself in the world. The morning. Sunlight filtered through her small apartment window, casting a warm glow across the room. She stretched slowly, feeling the familiar ache of tired muscles from long days at work. But there was also a strange lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. Life was still hard, still full of challenges she had to face every day, yet something had shifted. The encounters at the cafe with the CEO had left a subtle but powerful impact on her. She felt seen, valued, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a possibility beyond survival, a life that included connection, kindness, and small joys that weren't measured by money. Her day started as usual. She prepared a quick breakfast, brushed her hair, and dressed simply but neatly. As she walked to the bakery, she felt a small flicker of excitement, the same flutter she had felt before her first blind date. Today was different, though. Today she wasn't going in with fear or hesitation. Today she carried the quiet anticipation of someone who had been noticed, someone whose presence mattered, even in small ways. She entered the bakery, greeted her co-workers, and began her work. But her mind kept wandering to the moments at the cafe, the conversations and the subtle gestures that had changed how she felt about herself. Meanwhile, the CEO prepared for a meeting at his office, yet his thoughts continually drifted back to her. He had been watching her quietly from afar, observing her resilience, the way she handled herself despite challenges, and the honesty in her small daily actions. There was something remarkable about her, something beyond appearance, status, or wealth. He had realized that his admiration went deeper than casual curiosity. It was an appreciation of her character, her courage, and her ability to carry herself with dignity, even when life seemed heavy. Later that day, he decided to take a small, deliberate step. He returned to the cafe, not for himself, but with the hope of seeing her again. As he entered, he noticed her immediately, sitting quietly at a small table with her coffee. She looked up, startled for a moment, but then recognition and relief softened her expression. He offered a gentle smile, one that carried warmth, patience, and a subtle acknowledgement that he remembered her. Without hesitation, he approached her table. "Hello," he said softly. "May I join you?" There was no demand, no expectation, just a sincere invitation. She nodded, her heart beating faster, and gestured for him to sit. The small space between them seemed comfortable, yet charged with unspoken understanding. They began to talk again, slowly at first, then more freely as the quiet trust they had been building allowed their conversation to flow. She shared her thoughts on work, life, and small victories. And he listened attentively, asking gentle questions that showed he valued her perspective. At one point, the conversation turned toward her dreams. She hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate to speak about aspirations she rarely voiced aloud, but the calm encouragement in his eyes urged her to continue. She spoke of small goals, saving money for a better living space, taking a class she had always wanted to try, and perhaps one day, traveling beyond the city she had always known. He listened with sincere interest, nodding thoughtfully, and encouraged her with quiet, empowering words. It wasn't pity he offered, it was recognition of her determination and the potential he saw in her. She realized as they talked that she was no longer carrying the weight of constant anxiety alone. His presence was not a solution to her problems, but a reminder that someone could understand, appreciate, and support her without judgment. It was an experience she hadn't known she needed, and it transformed the ordinary act of sitting in a cafe into something profound. The afternoon unfolded with moments both simple and meaningful. They laughed over small anecdotes, shared observations about people around them, and even debated lightly over trivial matters with playful energy. She felt the nervousness that had clung to her in previous encounters begin to fade, replaced by a calm confidence that came from feeling truly acknowledged. He, in turn, felt a quiet awe at her resilience, humor, and depth, realizing that some connections could only be formed through genuine attention and shared humanity. Then came a small incident that tested both their comfort and the trust they had built. A man at the next table spilled his drink, creating a commotion that drew attention. She instinctively moved to help, grabbing napkins and offering assistance, showing her natural empathy. The CEO noticed and smiled quietly, admiring her calm and thoughtful response. The situation passed without drama, but it left a lingering sense of appreciation for the way she handled herself, without seeking recognition, without complaint, simply acting with kindness. As the cafe began to empty, he made a careful decision. "Would you like to take a walk with me?" he asked gently. She hesitated only briefly before agreeing, curious and excited about the opportunity. They stepped out into the late afternoon, the city bathed in the warm glow of the sun, the streets quieter and softer than during the day's rush. Walking together, they continued their conversation, sharing hopes, small fears, and reflections on life. She realized that in his presence, her worries about appearances and social expectations felt lighter, as though her authentic self was enough. During the walk, they encountered a small park. She paused at the edge, noticing children playing, couples sitting on benches, and the gentle sway of trees in the breeze. The simplicity of the scene contrasted sharply with the complexity of their own lives, yet it carried a quiet beauty. He suggested they sit on a bench, and together they watched the world around them, speaking in low, thoughtful tones. She shared stories from her childhood, moments of struggle and joy that had shaped her, and he listened with an attention that made her feel valued. At one point, he asked about her financial situation gently, sensing her hesitation but wanting to offer support without embarrassment. She admitted that things were tight, that every dollar mattered, and that even small gestures of generosity had a profound impact. He nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his pocket and offered a subtle gift, a small sum not as charity but as recognition of her perseverance and to ease immediate burdens. She looked at him, overwhelmed by the gesture and the care it represented, tears welling in her eyes. It was not the money itself, but the understanding and respect behind it that moved her deeply. She thanked him quietly, her voice trembling with gratitude. He shook his head gently. "It's not about the money," he said softly. "It's about seeing you, recognizing your strength, and giving you the support to keep moving forward." His words carried weight, not because of authority or status, but because they acknowledged her humanity and the struggle she bore with dignity. For her, it was a moment of validation, a recognition that she mattered not for what she had, but for who she was. They continued to walk, the streets emptying as evening fell. The city lights flickered on, creating a soft glow that reflected off windows and pavement. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years, a quiet confidence that the struggles she faced did not define her. She realized that connection, kindness, and genuine understanding were as vital to life as work, food, or shelter. With him, she experienced a rare equilibrium, a sense that someone could care deeply without expectation, that her worth was intrinsic and not measured by material possessions. As the evening deepened, they returned toward the cafe, stopping briefly to watch a small fountain sparkle in the light of street lamps. She laughed quietly at a playful comment he made, feeling lighter, freer, and more herself than she had in a long time. The moments, though simple, were profound, revealing that life's most meaningful experiences often came not from grandeur or wealth, but from genuine presence and shared humanity. Before parting, he turned to her and spoke softly. "I want you to know that you don't have to carry the weight alone. There are people who see you, who respect you, and who want to be there, not to fix you, but to walk alongside you." She nodded, understanding the depth of his words. It wasn't about charity or pity. It was about acknowledgement, support, and recognition of her strength. She felt a wave of gratitude and a quiet sense of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. That night she returned home, her heart full of reflection. She prepared a simple dinner, fed her cat, and sat quietly in her small apartment, letting the events of the day sink in. Life was still full of challenges, but she felt a renewed sense of resilience. The encounters with the CEO had reminded her that genuine connection, kindness, and recognition mattered profoundly. She realized that small gestures, thoughtful attention, and quiet support could alter the trajectory of someone's life, giving them hope, confidence, and a renewed sense of possibility. For the CEO, the night was also one of reflection. He thought about the strength, resilience, and quiet dignity of the girl he had come to admire. He realized that wealth, status, and power could not replace the value of authentic human connection. He had witnessed a life lived with courage and perseverance despite limitations, and he recognized that this was a rare and precious quality. The moments they shared had left an impression on him, revealing that life's most meaningful experiences were not in achievements or titles, but in genuine understanding, empathy, and shared humanity. Over the following weeks, their interactions grew more frequent. They met at the cafe, took walks through parks, and shared conversations that spanned the spectrum of life, from the mundane to the deeply personal. Each encounter strengthened the bond between them, deepening trust, admiration, and mutual respect. She grew more confident in her voice, her perspective, and her self-worth. He continued to recognize and appreciate her for who she was, not for what she could offer or achieve. Their connection became a quiet sanctuary amid the chaos of life, a space where authenticity was honored and humanity celebrated. Eventually, the girl realized that she was no longer living in a world of isolation and quiet desperation. The presence of someone who saw her, respected her, and valued her strength had transformed her perspective. Life remained challenging, but she faced it with renewed hope and courage, knowing that genuine connection could exist even in the most unexpected circumstances. The CEO, in turn, learned that admiration, respect, and kindness were more impactful than any professional achievement or material success. Their connection revealed the transformative power of empathy, recognition, and shared human experience. In the end, it was not grand gestures or dramatic events that defined their story. It was the quiet moments, the attention to small details, the understanding without judgment, the support without expectation, that created a profound bond. They discovered that life's richness often lay in the subtle, thoughtful interactions that reminded individuals of their value, strength, and humanity. For both, the experience became a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of recognition, and the enduring impact of shared empathy. And so, their story continued, not as a tale of wealth or status, but as a story of human connection, quiet courage, and the extraordinary impact of seeing and valuing someone for who they truly are. Each day became an opportunity to witness, support, and celebrate one another, proving that even in a world filled with struggle, genuine understanding and care could create moments of life-changing significance.